Hey listeners, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. I get the privilege of working alongside all of the creators at Enrollify, but I wanted to take just a quick moment to tell you about why I love the application, the podcast hosted by Allison Tercio, AVP for Enrollment and Marketing at Siena College. The application is your playbook for the ever-evolving world of higher ed enrollment marketing. This podcast zeroes in on the niche, often unexplored areas of the field, delivering a potent mix of actionable insights, practical strategies, and cutting-edge perspectives. Some of my favorite episodes are on topics like activating your school's student influencers, mastering the student inquiry moment, and even a roadmap to web accessibility. Allison cuts to the chase and keeps you entertained in these short 30-minute episodes that drop every other Tuesday. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search the application wherever you get your podcasts.
My number one tip would be to begin with curiosity. I have a sticky note on my desk that says ask better questions. And I think when giving feedback, the greatest gift you can give to your staff member is to first begin with curiosity and to ask them the right questions. I think it invites them into the conversation and gives them an opportunity to, one, get in the headspace to receive information, but for it to feel like a conversation and not a chastisement that they don't have any say in.
Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Tiers from Tutor Collegiate Strategies, and you're about to check out the latest episode of the Mission of Mission podcast, a show that's designed to help higher ed become better recruiters, communicators, marketers, and managers. Each week I'll introduce you to an industry leader or difference maker who will share helpful advice, tips, and strategies that will help you grow professionally and personally. Mission of Mission is part of the Enrollify podcast network. I'm excited to share my latest candid conversation, so let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Tiers, and this is episode 39 of the Mission of Missions podcast. As many of you listening know, my day job involves traveling around the country and partnering with different college and university admissions and enrollment marketing teams. And part of any training I lead involves meeting one-on-one with each team member and leader, which usually ends up being about 15 to 20 meetings when I'm on a campus. And for me, I love that because there's an opportunity to provide additional help and direction based on what I hear for each person, knowing that everybody's not at the same stage and doesn't have the same skill set. I do find it very interesting, though, as I continue to travel around, that a lot of higher ed leaders tell me they don't consistently meet one-on-one with each person they manage. Oftentimes, those meetings get pushed because people just get busy. Or new managers even tell me, well, I didn't know, am I supposed to be conducting one-on-ones? Like my boss has never told me that. And so I would argue there's a direct correlation between situations like those and staff productivity and retention. I am looking forward to unpackaging all of that further today with my guest, Ann Johnson, who is the Associate Director of Admission at North Dakota State. And she was actually recently named as well to a local 35 under 35 leadership group I found out in the Fargo area. So welcome to the show, Ann.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ann, as you and I were talking leading up to this, something in your bio caught me that I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that you have yet to find anything as rewarding as higher education. Talk to me a little bit more about why you said that.
The thing that I love so much about the work that I do is, of course, supporting students and leading my team. But there's so much variety in higher ed. And, I've had kind of non-negotiables for work for me that I identified many years ago. Higher ed has always ticked those boxes for me. And as I've, of course, I think any leader who's seeking continual growth will occasionally peruse, should I be doing something else? Should I be exploring other avenues? And I end up not doing that in most cases because I've yet to find another industry that I felt like could allow me to operate at the level that I operate in higher ed by doing such a wide variety of things. You know, one minute I can be talking a student through their financial aid package. The next minute I'm spending an hour helping our intern work through something that they're, you know, yesterday it was presenting. She was really struggling with presenting. You know, the next minute I'm presenting to faculty on why college and what we should be doing to support current students. And I love that. I love just the constant change and transition, and it just gives me a lot of energy, and I haven't yet found that anywhere else.
Because I want to spend a lot of our conversation talking about leadership, talking about a lot of the intentional things I know you're doing as a leader up there at NDSU. What do you think the most important leadership quality is if you had to pick one thing?
I could pick many things, but if I have to pick one, I would say mutual appreciation. And what I mean by that is not, you know, even just saying, hey, I appreciate you, which I think that's important too. The thing that I found to be most effective is knowing that I have people on my team that I can appreciate what they're bringing to the table. I now work really hard at finding gaps that things that I'm not good at, and filling that with things that excite other people. You know, for example, I can do data. I'm doing a quantitative thesis right now. Like, I can do it, but it drains the life out of me. It does not give me energy. You want to burn me out, make me run data for a month straight. But I have people on my team that get so excited about that and that enjoy that. And so I have a deeper appreciation for their love of that because it helps fit the puzzle together. You know, I am a wooer. You know, we're going to do strength finders. It's my top strength. It's something that I enjoy and that I can do, but I have someone on my team who's better at it than I am. You know, he can get on a 17-year-old's level in a way that I can't. He can speak the sports language or whatever they're involved in a way that I can't. And so I really appreciate that, and I admire that and learn from that. And so I just think that's so valuable. You know, I don't necessarily think you have to always quote unquote like everyone on your team, although I do truly. But I do think you need to appreciate them. And if you aren't hiring people and selecting people that have skills and bring things to the table that you can genuinely appreciate, then I don't think you're able to develop them to the highest level and in the way that maybe they deserve. And I also think that I want them to appreciate me and what I bring to the table too. So I do think it has to be mutual.
I've had a lot of people that we both know mutually and tell me you're incredibly intentional when it comes to developing yourself and your team. Give us some examples of how intentionality works within your leadership.
Yeah, well, that's first really nice. So I appreciate that. But yeah, so a couple tools that I've developed over the years that have really helped have been formed from me doing this really badly. You know, I started supervising staff twice my age at 23. I have no idea what they were thinking having me do that. I was not very equipped. And I did a lot of things really badly. But I'm very grateful for that opportunity to fail because it allowed me to, I think, get a lot better at things a lot quicker. So one of the things that I do with all brand new staff members is I have them fill out this document that I'm sure I adopted parts of it from somewhere. Couldn't even tell you where because I've had it so long. So apologies for maybe not giving some credit somewhere, but it's called The Best of Me. And I've added things to it over the years. It used to be a Word doc that I printed out for them and put in their folder on their first day, and I would have them handwritten. So I still have, you know, dozens of them in my files that I've kept over the years. I've stepped up and now it's Qualtrics. But I ask them things like, what makes them feel valued? What makes them feel appreciated? What triggers them? What's their favorite snack and favorite drink? How do I get the best out of them? And what motivates them to do their best work? They fill that out like on their very first day in the office. And I find that it just sets a tone for how I operate and how I want us to operate together. Like I want to supervise you. And I also ask a couple questions about how they best learn and to kind of help me with training a little bit. But I want them to know that I care about those things and that I want them to be motivated and that I want to get the very best out of them. And I try to set that expectation right away. I don't want this to just be a job that you just do. So that's one thing. Another is I do a yearly self-assessment as part of annual review time. That is like the greatest indicator I have of how long I have a staff member that's going to stay or not, and what I can do to maybe change that. Our annual reporting process is like setting goals and reviewing the goals from last year. Like that's the standard for HR. That doesn't really do a whole lot for me as far as developing my team. Quite frankly, it's more so just a pain in the butt. Happy to do it, but it's not the most helpful. But this self-assessment it does ask, what are you most proud of in the last year? What are the best projects you worked on and why? What were your least favorite projects or tasks that you did or parts of your job and why? I have a section on there that asks them to give feedback about me. How can I better support you as a supervisor? Is there anything I could have done differently this year? Is there anything that you need more of from me? And then the last question that I ask is I ask them to rate their job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10 and tell me why. And none of these questions are like groundbreaking, but the raw honesty that I get in these self-assessment surveys shocked me. I've had staff tell me, I can't do another fall like I did this fall. And if I have to do another fall, I'm going to have to start exploring other options because I can't do that again. It was too much for me. And even though I maybe knew that they were struggling, seeing that and us having them knowing that we're going to have a conversation about it has just been really powerful, So I've had people that I thought were doing great rate a 6. And they're like, it's really not the job. I'm just really struggling in my personal life. And I just don't know if I can, I don't know if this position aligns with what I need at home anymore. Okay, I didn't know that. Like, let's have a conversation about that. And oftentimes I get 10s when I wasn't really expecting 10s. And that's really cool too, of like, wow, like the amount of autonomy or whatever that you have right now is really working for you. So I always know when my staff are going to quit for the most part. Of course, I get surprised sometimes, but I'm like, if you gave me a 6 on your self-assessment in February, like unless I turn things in the next 6 months, you're going to be gone. And knowing the high turnover in higher ed that we have, it's really powerful for me to know that and to have the opportunity to address it if I can.
You talked about having a lot of failure before you got to the point you're at now and became more intentional and did things different as a leader. Was it easy, Anne, or was it hard? Like, help me understand for you to say, okay, clearly what I'm doing is not working. Clearly my staff is not engaging the way I want them to engage with me. I need to change. And that's such a hard thing. I would argue for all of us as humans, but I would also argue it's what separates somebody who's good at their job from being great at their job is the ability to say, okay, it's not the end of the world. At least I can identify it. Now let me come up with a solution. For you, that whole process of doing that, easy, hard, help me understand.
Yeah, of course it was hard. I'm a person who likes to be really good at things. I like to do things that I'm really good at. And so when I know that something's not working, but I didn't know exactly how to fix it, that was really hard for me. And so I was trying things, I think of like back to my 23, 24-year-old self, knowing I'm not connecting with some of my staff members. And so I'm doing things like I remember one time I knew that we needed to bond, and but I didn't really know how to do that as a 24-year-old, to bond with someone who's 57 and thinks that I am not cut out for the job. But I knew that we needed to do something. So I had us do an exercise where we drew on each other's backs and tried to guess what we were drawing. That was not it, Jeremy. That was not the solution for us to bond. But I knew we needed to do something. And so a lot of it was just trial and error. I didn't receive any like supervisory or leadership development or training at that time. I had never really even heard of like how do you develop as a leader. So of course, I started reading books and that absolutely helped. For better or worse, because I was in the role, a lot of it was trial by fire, and now I would have loved to like do that differently. Thankfully, when I first started supervising, I supervised some professional staff, but I also supervised 100 students. And I feel like students are a little bit more gracious with your fumbles. And so I think that did help me, was getting to work out some of those kinks of what is resonating, how can we develop as a team, in ways that were a little less cheesy and maybe a little more effective. But the greatest thing that I think I learned was to have my team's back. And I didn't do that early on. I think as leaders, very, very often, people above us come to us to complain or to express concern about someone that we supervise. And I think the greatest mistake that I made as a leader was being more concerned about how that person above me perceived me than how I was about how I helped the person below me work through that issue. And so I would try to have these huge reactions to match the concern of the person above me instead of gathering more information from the person that I was supervising first. And I think I hurt a lot of relationships doing that, because when I find out the whole story, it's never been as egregious, in my opinion, as it was presented to me at first. And so I've learned, two things. One, like, hey, that doesn't sound like them. Let me get some more information and I'm going to circle back with you on a plan. Like, that's what I should say. Or, hey, yeah, they've been struggling with that. I'm aware of it. We've talked about it. Let me revisit it with them and see what we can do. That's such a different conversation than like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. I'm going to go address it right now, because I was too worried about my own ego and how I felt like them having an issue with the person that I supervise was a bad reflection on me, and it's not. So I think that was one of the hardest lessons for me to learn, because my ego was involved.
It's interesting because you obviously are seeing in higher ed a lot of younger age-wise, right, leaders start to take on those assistant, associate, and even director level jobs. And one of the early episodes I did in the podcast was with someone I consider a good friend, Megan Tyler, who's the director at Wofford. And Megan started her leadership journey in her 20s like you. And it's very interesting how similar it is just to hear you and other leaders like Megan talk about, listen, I just got comfortable failing. And then I had self-motivation enough to say, okay, I don't like failing. This sucks. So what do I need to do? And one of those things sometimes is I have to realize, like, maybe I need to ask for help, or maybe my ego, to your point, is like too high on my importance scale. And I just have to realize, wait, and this is my mantra about leadership, right? Leadership is this concept of you serving others, not others serving you. Like, you, right, report to them, not the other way around, is how I try to explain it to people. And so talk to me about then the one-on-ones that I know you do throughout the year with the people that you manage. What's the greatest thing? Because obviously you're going to learn a lot in those one-on-ones, but like, if you have to narrow it down to one or two things, why are one-on-ones so valuable? If somebody came to you and said, hey, Ann, I'm a leader, I don't do them consistently, help me understand why I should do them more consistently throughout the year.
I don't think there's any other way to get a pulse check on how your folks are doing and what's going on with them. There's obviously lots of other ways that I can find out if they're doing their job, right? Like, I can go look in their inboxes. I can go look at the travel calendar. I can assess what they're doing day to day without talking to them. I don't find that very effective, so I don't do that, because I think how they describe it to me is much more impactful. Yeah, I have all this travel scheduled, but gosh, scheduling it was the hardest it's ever been. Something we're doing is not working. I really think we need to get some communication out to school counselors. Like, I would never have learned that by just seeing that they had all this travel scheduled. So it helps me get a pulse. And because I do oversee our whole recruitment side of the house, there's so many other moving parts that are connected. Our comms may be impacted, or an email that went out may have resulted in all these responses with all these questions that I wouldn't have known if we weren't chatting about it and having that time. My one-on-ones with my staff are they're completely unscripted. I almost never have an agenda for them. Occasionally I'll have, a running list of things that I want to ask them about or get updates on. But one thing that's changed over the years is letting my staff lead those more than me lead them. I don't, especially with younger staff, I've had some staff that were extremely intimidated by the fact that we had these monthly meetings. Like, what am I supposed to do? So I've tried to make it very clear, like, that's just your time. Like, keep a running list of questions that you have for me, or things that you're wondering about, or things you feel like you need training on, something you heard in a meeting that you didn't understand, or just ideas you have, and we'll talk about them then. And I feel like that's helped it not seem like, oh, that's what I'm going to get checked up on. And instead that's when we're going to chat, and I'm going to have their undivided attention for whatever we need.
So how do you get someone, let's play out that example if you're willing to do it with me. You have a staff member come in, you can tell they're kind of looking going, and I don't know what we're supposed to be doing here. I don't know what I'm supposed to say and do. How do you communicate to them in a way then that lends itself to that being a productive meeting, when you can tell either A, they're just not taking it as seriously, or B, they don't see the value and they're kind of like, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm. I will oftentimes start by having them tell me about a student, because find if I can bring it back to the people and the core of their work, that is usually a good place to start. So tell me about someone you've worked with this week. Tell me about an admission appointment that you've had, or someone in your texting inbox that's asked a lot of questions. Do you feel like you're building relationships yet? This is typically a brand new staff member who maybe doesn't even fully know what their job is yet, but they're just trying to figure it out. And usually if I can have them do that, it's just really telling for me, because if they can't do that, that's usually telling. Like, okay, are you not making connections with students? Are you not talking to students? Because that's, I need to do some digging if you can't answer that. But if they can, and most of the time they can, and they get really excited, and they're like, yeah, I had this really cool, I sat in on an appointment with somebody else, and they tell me this story about a student. And they relax, because they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I like this job working with students. And then I also think that takes the pressure off of, like, I'm not going to grill you right now. I'm not trying to figure out what I just want to hear about what's going on and what you're experiencing. I think that helps to just disarm them a little bit. I also just try to say before those meetings, like, hey, I just explain what they're going to be before they happen. Hey, I'm going to be putting these meetings on your calendars. I know we've been touching base every day while you've been in training, but as you get more comfortable, you may not see me every day. My calendar is also disgusting, so I want to have this time set aside for us to know that we can chat. So as things come up, if it's immediate, you can always Teams me or stop by, but keep a running list of things, because that's when we'll have our next time together. And if I used to not do that, and they were terrified. But now I do, and I've noticed a huge difference. They're just like, oh, cool, we're just going to talk, and it's not going to be a big deal.
So active listening, I would argue, then is super important in one-on-ones without question. I think that goes without saying. Talk to me about embracing vulnerability, because I would love to get your thoughts on that. And I've had some leaders tell me, Jeremy, I won't do it. I feel like it cheapens me as a leader. It makes me look weak. And I have other people who are like, Jeremy, when I learned how to embrace it, the level of depth of my meetings and relationship with my staff exploded.
Mm-hmm. I'm in the latter camp for sure. Quite frankly, boundaries. I say that jokingly, but I spend a ton of time with the people inside this building. I spend more times with them most weeks than I spend with my kids. So I want to know about your life and I want to know about you as a person, because otherwise I think it would suck the life out of me. I care about my staff and I care about what they like to do and the weird things that they're into and their weird murder mystery things, or the Gen Z staff that told me yesterday that NBD was not a thing that we say anymore. She had no idea what NBD, no big deal, meant. She was like, yeah, you got to stop saying that. Like, I want, I want that. I want to know how your cat is, or, like what's going on with your kid that's been puking for the last 7 days. Because I'm going to share that with you. Like, I don't stop living the other parts of, again, it goes back to my belief on integration. Like, my kids don't stop being my kids because I walk into Ceres Hall at North Dakota State University. And what's going on in your life doesn't stop because you're now sitting in your office. And so in order for me to care and for me to ask questions about what's going on in your life, I have to know what's going on in your life. And of course, within reason, right? Like, I'm certainly not going to overshare with them in my personal life, but they do know. They know, like, they've known when I've moved. They've known when my kids are sick. They know that I'm probably going to need to take a week off when my 5-year-old starts kindergarten because I'm already not coping well. They know when I've had deaths and I'm struggling and I'm more distracted because I've got some things going on that I'm dealing with. And I think that's really valuable. I truly don't believe that you can lead a whole person and develop them to be their best selves if you don't care about all the parts of them and not just how they talk to students.
So you talked, Anne, about how your meetings have evolved a little bit over time and how you allow your staff to take the lead a little bit more. Is there anything else that's really changed in the years that you've been managing in terms of when you do one-on-ones? Maybe, hey, I wasn't doing this 5 years ago, Jeremy, and now, and it can be something your staff does or even something you do before, during, after.
The only I try really hard to not ever cancel them. That's pretty rare. If they have to be moved around, I just move them. But there's very few instances where it's a full cancel because we only for the last several years I've supervised 11 people, which is a lot. And if I cancel it, I'm probably not going to be able to find a time to reschedule it, and it's just not going to happen. So I try to always keep them. And as far as things that I've done differently, it's really just been in how I've set them up. I've just noticed it, especially with younger staff. They just are really caught off guard by them. And so I've done just a lot more of prep for setting them up and explaining what they are. I've also tried more recently to just provide options for what I've noticed that staff don't always know how they learn. They don't know what they need, and they don't know what will help them. They're just overwhelmed. The end. They don't know why, and so I've tried to just give more options. This is something that I'm still feel like I'm in the process of learning. But there's been a few staff in particular. I used to be pretty hands off. Like, I train you, I do all your things, we meet, I check in very regularly, but you're just doing your thing. And I've noticed that some staff really need more. Like, they need, they need me to help them manage their time better. That is really hard for me because to me that feels like micromanaging. But they're asking for it. So that's something that I'm still working through, is figuring out how to best do that in a way that still feels genuine and authentic for me. And I still feel like I'm empowering them while also meeting their needs. So I had one staff member where that meant every Monday, she sent me a list of her task for that week. And then on Friday, I would ask, did you complete those tasks? Like, I kind of hated that because I'm like, you just to do your task. I don't want to have to ask you, but she needed that. And so that's something that I really feel like I'm still working through, is is how to do that well and how to still meet their needs and help them figure out, I've kind of had to go through a multiple choice exercise of, do you need help with calendar management? How, I have like a pretty psychotic to-do list process. Would you like to hear about it? Can we try some other things? Because I've more recently, I just feel like staff haven't yet developed those things to know, oh yeah, this is a system that works for me. So that's been something that has been new, is helping them develop what those systems are and how to best utilize systems in order to complete their job effectively. And I never would have in a million years done that, I would say even 5 years ago.
Do you take a lot of notes then, Anne, during one-on-ones, if you're willing to share? Is it, all right, mentally I'm taking notes, my staff leaves, I write down a couple of things I want to remember, or are you of the mindset, nope, I don't need to take notes, and here's why?
I guess it depends, oftentimes. So one thing that our office does a little bit differently than I think some others that I've been involved with is all of our admission counselors have kind of areas that they oversee, which we could have a whole nother podcast about that. I think it's wildly important, and I think helps them stay. So for example, one of my staff members oversees setting up all of our texting campaigns. So when she and I meet, it's very tactile, like we're moving around what texting jobs we're going to do when, and looking at the calendar to see what emails are going out when. And we have a master plan that we set in the summer. But as you know, like what happened and what we thought was going to happen in the summer is definitely not what is really happening now that we're in March. And so those meetings, like there's typically things that she's doing and that then I need to do so that she can continue to do her part of the task. So a lot of, we'll visit and get updates, but then we're working together on this project that we've identified that she's very good at because she's very organized and, is very in tune to her skills. And so in those situations, yes, because in pretty much every meeting that I have, I walk away with a task. Because again, I agree with you with something you said earlier, that I serve my staff and that is my main job. And in order to serve them, there's always things that I need to be doing, or things that they need from me, or reports that they need, or information that they need updates on. And so my notes are typically to-dos, things that I need to do or to gather for them. As far as like notes on what they're doing, no, I don't ever write that stuff down because they've told me and it sounded good and I trusted it. So I don't necessarily feel the need to document it. So it's mostly to-dos that I'm writing down.
So I think it's just figuring out what works for you. And
Mm-hmm.
along with that, does it work, not just for
Mm-hmm.
you, but for the staff member that, to your point, you're trying to serve, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I find it helpful to tell them to, especially with younger staff. I notice sometimes they seem nervous if they see me writing. And so I'll say, hey, I'm making a note for myself so I don't forget to circle back on this. Or, that was a really good point. I know I need to come back to that. And so I find myself explaining what I'm doing a lot more so that they don't feel that anxiety rise.
Totally get it. Context. Leadership
Mm-hmm.
doesn't give enough of it in so many situations. And I think that's a great example of where leadership can and should give more context, just so that the other person feels comfortable and kind of understands the nature of what's happening. So giving tough feedback then, Anne, I have to believe you've had to do a number of times over your career as a leader, and it's obviously not easy, but I would argue, and tell me if you agree, but like it's paramount, right? If you're going to help somebody grow, completely sugarcoating something is not the way to do it. So how do you have that tough conversation? And I have to believe, right, based on our conversation, that you find ways to infuse empathy and other things. But
Mm-hmm.
I would love to just any tips if somebody's struggling with, boy, like I'm not good at doing tough conversations with my team, regardless of their age and who, how old the leader may be. Just any tips or suggestions?
Yeah, my number one tip would be to begin with curiosity. I have a sticky note on my desk that says ask better questions. And I think when giving feedback, the greatest gift you can give to your staff member is to first begin with curiosity and to ask them the right questions. I think it invites them into the conversation and gives them an opportunity to one, get in the headspace to receive information, but for it to feel like a conversation and not a chastisement that they don't have any say in. So, for example, it could be as little as I heard them say something incorrect to a student. Something as little as we have a very big do not blind transfer someone in our office. Like you do a warm transfer, you explain, they don't have to retell their whole life story, etc. So something as little as I heard them do a blind transfer. So asking the question like, hey, tell me how you're feeling on the phones. How are you feeling about financial aid information? Can you tell me your comfort level with sharing this information? 8 times out of 10, they'll tell me, like, honestly, I have a lot of anxiety about that. I don't think I'm doing very well. Okay, okay, well, then I don't have to chastise you because you've just shared with me. So now we get to say, okay, how can I better support you? Let's come up with a plan. This is now a collaborative conversation and we make a plan to address it. Let's do some practice. I'm going to call you from my office and we're going to role play this or, whatever. And I always think, what do I want the outcome to be? If I want the outcome to be that they feel more confident in this information and it is now accurate, I am not going to get that outcome if I come in hot and say, hey, this information that you shared was just absolutely wrong. You should know this. What's going on? Okay, well, now they're on the defensive and they feel like an idiot and we're not going to get anywhere. And I won't even get to train them because they're going to be crying. So start with curiosity and ask questions, I think, is the most effective. If there's something, larger or that's truly a performance issue, something that I've started doing over the last couple of years is giving them a heads up that we're going to need to talk about it. So I'll send them a Teams message and say, hey, I'm going to need to talk with you about taking 4-hour lunches. That's never happened. I just made that up. But, I'm going to need to talk to you about being available. I have some thoughts and I think we can come up with some solutions together. I'm putting some time on our calendar at 10 a.m. this morning. Didn't want you to be caught off guard. That's what I want to talk about. So if you can be prepared to share a little bit about what's going on in that area, that's what we're going to be discussing. They still hate that, right? Like they're still going to be anxious about that, but at least they know. And I think it helps. If I do that, I try to schedule it like really soon after I send that message. So they're not waiting all day for this, torturous conversation. So yeah, I think that the biggest, most life-changing things for me have been curiosity. Always let them talk first, giving them a heads up if there's something that I need to talk to them about, and always having their back. If somebody else is lodging a complaint, I try to always let my staff know, like, I know sometimes you're going to have to make decisions without me, and I will always have your back. Even if it's the wrong decision, we can figure it out later together.
I love that you do that. And I have no doubt that you showing them and not just saying, I have your back, right? Them being able to see that is part of the reason why you have such a good working relationship with a lot of your team. And I love, Ann, that you hit on curiosity too. I had Bart Kaler on my podcast 3 or 4 episodes ago, and I asked him, hey, what's a skill that most young professionals need to develop more? And he immediately went to, they just need to be more curious. And I think you're spot on with that. And I encourage a ton of young professionals all the time, or anybody in a new role, be curious, learn, test, try. Yep, you're going to fail. And yep, stop's not going to work. But again, continue to be curious, because it allows you not only to grow as an individual, but potentially able to serve, in your case, the staff that you manage, or if it's a young counselor, the students and families, right, that they're trying to help through this entire process. I would love to ask you one last thing. You started, if I heard you correctly, supervising staff at age 23. What would you tell your 23-year-old self now, looking back, right? Hindsight being 2020. So if somebody listening to this is like, I'm in my early 20s too. God, I resonate with so much, Anne, of what you're saying. What would you have liked to have maybe known that would have been valuable and helped you with your leadership growth at such a young age that maybe just back then you didn't?
I think the greatest thing that I could have done back then would have been to learn from my staff, because I did have a lot of ego and I felt so much like I had to prove myself and I had to exert this authority and I had to follow every rule and enforce every rule. I didn't put people first. So I think I would tell myself to learn from my staff, because they definitely knew more than I did at the time. And my ego was too big to learn from them. I wanted them to think I already knew everything so that they respected me. And I think I would tell myself to never let protocol get in the way of people. Sometimes rules are meant to be broken if it supports a person, and I'm huge on fairness with my staff, and I try to be very, very intentional about that. But sometimes things happen and things arise, and I need to give somebody a little more rope and I need to give them a little more grace. And I think that doesn't make me a pushover, and that doesn't make me, any of those things that my 23-year-old self thought it made me. But I was so worried about being a pushover that I put protocol over people, and I didn't learn from them. And so I wish that I had, been willing to just be a little more flexible so that the people can benefit and the trust can be built.
Thank you for being so transparent about that and just other things that we've talked about today. I think this is going to help a lot of leaders, regardless of their age and years of experience. And I end every podcast with something I call fun rapid fire. So I'm just going to give you 4 or 5 things, and I want to get some quick feedback from you on each, okay?
Okay.
Caribou or Starbucks?
Starbucks.
Biggest challenge of being an extrovert is what?
Being married to an introvert.
Interesting. So you grew up in Alabama, so I'm going to go out on a limb and assume you know what Jim and Nick's is.
Yes.
Go-to order at Jim and Nick's? Do we have one?
No. I'm a vegetarian, so...
Barbecue was probably a bad choice then. What do we miss most, though, besides the food? I know you told me you missed the food in Alabama. What else?
I do. I miss the spices. Midwesterners just don't know anything about the Creole spices. So I moved here with like a 32-ounce can of Tony Chachere's Creole salt because I was so afraid I wouldn't be able to find it here. Luckily, I can find it here. I just have to look very hard. But I miss the spices, hands down.
Favorite concert you've ever been to is what? Is there a phrase that you find yourself using a lot since you became a mom?
I have 2 boys, so ease up on the potty words is probably something that I say more than I ever thought that I would say.
Awesome. Thanks so much again just for being on the show today, Ann, and sharing. If people do want to get a hold of you and, just do any sort of outreach and maybe follow up, if you're open to that, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have about the most generic name that exists in the world, Ann Johnson. So good luck finding me, but would love to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, emails, probably the best way. I have a D in between Ann and Johnson in my email, so to help identify me from all the other Ann Johnsons in the world. But thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun.
Absolutely. And we'll link Ann's LinkedIn bio in the show notes like we do with every guest. And I just want to tell everybody before we sign off how much I appreciate you listening and look forward to the next time we connect. Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mission Admissions with Jeremy Tiers. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing, learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.